Hello everyone, and welcome to the Wonder Words. I know many of you use this video to help you fall asleep, so before that, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Now, get cozy, take a deep breath, and let yourself relax. The Midnight Library. The rain began just before midnight. Not a storm, just a slow, steady fall that tapped gently against the arched skylights of the Midnight Library. The old glass panes, ribbed with iron, carried the sound softly down into the darkened hall. It was the only noise in the building, until Simone unlocked the front door at exactly 1 a.m. She always arrived 10 minutes early. She liked the ritual, setting the brass key in the heavy lock, hearing the click echo across the marble floor, feeling the deep silence give way to something more alive. The library smelled like paper and stone, and something faintly floral, lavender from the oil she dabbed on her wrists before starting her shift. Simone was tall and quiet, with soft brown hair pulled back into a low knot. Her boots echoed as she moved through the main room, switching on lamps one by one. Their yellow glow puddled under each green shade. There were no other lights, just the desk lamps, and the rain, and the shelves. Thousands of books, none with titles on the spines. No Dewey Decimal, no catalog, but each one had a story, and each one had been rewritten. Because that was what the Midnight Library did. Between 1 and 4 a.m., it opened to the few who knew of it. Those who came could sit, read, write, or simply think. But if they left something behind, especially something handwritten, the library took it. Not in a malicious way. It absorbed it, transformed it. A torn love letter could return as a children's story about a sea otter. A shopping list jotted during a panic attack might reappear a week later as a poem about quiet breakfasts and empty streets. Simone didn't question how it worked. She didn't need to. Her job was simple: open the doors, stay present, and make sure nothing, no one, disrupted the library's hours. At 1:15, the first visitor arrived. He was young, maybe mid-20s, in blue scrubs under a soaked gray hoodie. He didn't speak, just nodded and signed the guest book with a cheap ballpoint pen, Dr. K. Reyes. Simone watched him drift toward the back, where the skylight arched above a long wooden table. He didn't pick a book. He pulled a small black journal from his backpack and began to write. The pencil made a soft scratch on the paper. Rain tapped gently overhead. Somewhere, a page turned. Simone sat at the front desk, sipping mint tea from her thermos. The minutes passed like mist. She watched him occasionally. His head bent low, shoulders hunched, eyes dark with exhaustion. Every few pages, he'd stop, exhale slowly, then continue. His pencil never left his hand. At 3:53, he stood suddenly. He stretched, his back cracked audibly, then slid the journal into the center of the table and walked out without a word. Simone waited until the door clicked shut behind him. Then she rose, moved across the room, and picked up the journal. It was heavy, worn, the pages dense with cramped, urgent handwriting. She didn't read it. That wasn't her place. She simply closed the book, ran her fingers along its spine, and walked it over to the poetry shelves. There, in the corner under the skylight, where rain still whispered on the glass, she slid the journal in beside a volume of cloud haikus. By morning, the journal would change. She knew that. Its grief would soften, its stress dissolve. The surgeon's pain would become breath and rhythm. Haikus about clouds. Simone turned off the lamps, locked the door behind her. Rain still fell, lighter now. Another night, another burden shelved. And the library, silent once more, waited for tomorrow. The next night, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and pavement, and the clouds hung low, silvered by a waning moon. Simone arrived at 12:50 a.m., as always, her boots stepping around puddles like muscle memory. She carried no bag, just her ring of brass keys and the same battered thermos of mint tea. Inside, the air was still cool from the night before. She turned on the lamps, and the library came to life like it always did. Not suddenly, but gently, like a breath filling a room. Light pooled across the stone floor. Shadows crept behind the armchairs and laddered bookshelves. She walked quietly to the back, curiosity tugging at her heels. The black journal was still there, but not as it had been. Its spine now bore no writing. The cover was pale blue, like faded hospital sheets, and when Simone opened it, The pages had transformed. No more cramped, panicked lines. No charts, no schedules, no bloodied thoughts scribbled at the edge of sleep. Instead, scalpel flash, breath still. White clouds drift through steady hands. Rain falls in silence. Simone's fingers lingered on the page. A warmth spread through her chest, not just at the beauty of the words, but at the fact that they remained. Proof the library had listened, had done its work. She closed the book and left it where it belonged. At 1:13, a new guest arrived. This one was older, a woman in her 60s, with silver curls escaping a velvet head wrap. Her coat was dark red, lined with silk, and she smelled faintly of oranges. She moved slowly but with purpose, and when she smiled at Simone, it was a small, knowing thing. First time, Simone asked softly. The woman shook her head. Second, my first was 20 years ago, before the library moved. Simone's eyebrows lifted. Few people knew its old locations. Fewer still returned. The woman didn't elaborate. She signed the book, E. Halbert. Her handwriting was delicate, like threads of lace. Without another word, she made her way to a reading alcove. There, she pulled a book from a shelf, not looking at the spine, of course, since none were labeled. She opened it gently and began to read. Simone watched from her desk. Miss Halbert, like most who came here, seemed to understand the rules without needing to be told. No talking, no devices, no taking books away. But she also didn't write anything down, just sat, flipping pages slowly, her lips moving sometimes as if she were tasting each word aloud. Occasionally, she would pause, close her eyes, and just breathe. At 2:55, she rose, returned the book to the shelf with reverence, and walked toward the door. This time, she stopped in front of Simone. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "It's still just as I remember." Simone gave a quiet nod. "You're always welcome." When the woman left, Simone returned to the alcove. She found the book Miss Halbert had held and opened it at random. Inside were stories, not stories in the usual sense, but memories woven into prose. A chapter about a child's laughter in a garden full of tulips. Another about saying goodbye at a train station in 1968. All written as if they had happened to someone else, but they hadn't. Not really. The library, again, had done its work. Someone else's journal, rewritten, softened. Time braided into poetry. Simone shelved it quietly and listened to the silence settle in. At 3:44, the clock ticked softly overhead. No new visitors. Only the sound of one last page turning, somewhere deep in the stacks. And then, the flutter of wings. Simone looked up. A small white moth had flown in through the transom window above the main door. It circled the reading lamps, then drifted toward the poetry shelves, wings glowing faintly in the lamplight. She followed it with her eyes, watched it land on the blue-covered haiku journal, the one the surgeon had left. The moth twitched, then stilled. Simone smiled. By morning, even that visit would become part of the pages. She was certain of it. The following night was cold, the kind of crisp July chill that snuck in under the cuffs of Simone's coat and turned her breath to fog. She turned the key in the library's lock right at 1 a.m., her fingers tingling from the walkover. The door opened with a deep creak, and the familiar scent met her. Paper, lavender, faint rain-damp stone. Simone lit the lamps and stood for a while in the soft hush, watching dust swirl in the beams of yellow light. It was always this moment, the stillness before the first arrival, that reminded her why she stayed. Not for money. There wasn't much. But for this, the feeling that the world had a hidden place where burdens were rewritten into beauty. And she was its witness. At 1:25, the door opened with a gust of sharp air. A young woman entered, shoulders hunched, eyes wide and ringed with red. She wore a long navy coat over a cocktail dress, the hem frayed. Her heels clacked on the marble, then slowed as she crossed the threshold. Simone looked up. The woman's hands trembled slightly as she signed in, T. Morel. No conversation, just a tight smile and a nod. Then she walked to an empty table near the geography section and sat heavily. From her purse, she pulled out a tissue-wrapped bundle. Inside, folded pages, perhaps a letter, or many. Her hands hovered over them for a long moment. Then, with visible reluctance, she unwrapped them. She didn't write. She only read, page after page, silently, with her lips pressed tight. A single tear welled in her left eye and clung stubbornly to her lashes before finally dropping onto the paper. She wiped it quickly. Simone kept her distance. The woman read for nearly an hour. At 2:18, she stood, gathered the bundle, and walked to the poetry shelves. She hesitated, looked around. Simone offered a small nod. Morel slid the pages in between two slim books. She turned without another word and walked out the door, heels echoing once, twice, and then fading. Simone waited until the clock read 2:30, then crossed the floor. She reached between the same two volumes and found the letter bundle, now still damp in one corner. This time, she allowed herself a glance. The first page began. I know I said things I can't undo, but you said forever. You said forever. The rest trailed off into messy, slanted lines. Anger, sadness, salt from tears dried into the fibers. Simone closed the pages. She could almost feel the heat of heartbreak in the paper. She placed the bundle back, exactly where it had been left. The library would know what to do. It always did. The rest of the night passed quietly. A retired violinist came in at 3:02, whistled a single note as he browsed the shelves, and left with a sigh. A teenage boy wandered in at 3:40, wrote something on a napkin, then folded it and slid it into the spine of an atlas. Simone smiled at his awkwardness. They all came in different forms, but all carried something heavy. At 4 o'clock, the bell chimed softly. Simone rose, walked the floor, and turned off the lamps. Each light winked out like the end of a star. She moved toward the poetry shelf again, curious. The bundle was gone. In its place sat a new, thin book with a watercolor cover. Blue and pink clouds bled across the front. She opened it to the center. Your name tastes like dawn. Soft, unspoken, not bitter. Still I say it slow. Simone read 3 more. Each haiku dripped with longing. Each one a little softer than the words that had been left behind. She replaced the book gently, like placing a hand on someone's shoulder. Outside, the city remained asleep. But here, in the hush of ink and transformation, hearts healed one page at a time. At 12:57 a.m., Simone arrived to find someone already standing outside. The man was tall, lean, and wearing an old pea coat with a broken collar. His silver hair was cropped short, his hands stuffed deep into his pockets. He stared at the door with the look of someone trying to remember why they'd come. Simone approached slowly. Are you here for the library? The man blinked. I think so. You're early, she said gently. But that's all right. She unlocked the door and stepped aside. He didn't move for a moment, then nodded and entered. Inside, under the warm light of the desk lamps, the man looked around like he was stepping into a forgotten childhood home. Simone watched him scan the shelves. No guest book, he asked. She tilted her head. There is. Right here. She tapped the open ledger. He came to the desk and frowned at the page. I'm not sure what to write. Your name, Simone said. He hesitated, then scribbled something shaky. W. Adrian. He wandered the stacks like a ghost, unsure where to settle. For nearly 20 minutes, he didn't pick up a single book, just walked. Sometimes he paused to read the spines that held no names. Sometimes he pressed his fingers against the wood, as though trying to recall the texture. Finally, he sat in an armchair near the fiction alcove and pulled a thin, blank notebook from his coat pocket. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he wrote, I forget my wife's laugh, but I remember the way she buttered toast, edge to edge, always 2 knives. Simone paused in her shelving as the words drifted to her ears. The pencil scratched softly in rhythm with the ticking clock. He continued, Sometimes I wake and think I'm still 26. Then the mirror reminds me I'm not. I think I had a dog once. Or maybe it was a cat. There was no rush in his writing, only a gentle sorrow, a slow unraveling of memory. By 3:41, the man stood. He looked around again, confused for a moment. Then he folded the notebook, placed it carefully on the armchair, and made his way to the door. Before leaving, he turned to Simone. This place, he said, voice thin. It feels like a dream I used to have. Simone smiled. Maybe you did. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and left. She waited until the silence settled again, then picked up the notebook. It felt fragile, like something that might crumble if handled too roughly. Inside, the handwriting had already started to fade, just a little. The ink didn't vanish, but softened, like memories drifting into fog. She walked it to the back shelf, near the older stories, and nestled it beside a thick volume with embossed leaves on the cover. At 3:58, the skylight caught the moonlight. A breeze crept in through the cracked window above the genealogy section, and the notebook pages rustled once, like a sigh. By morning, Simone knew the book would change. Its recollections would twist into fiction, perhaps, or lullabies, maybe even recipes that hinted at something lost. She didn't need to know which. She only needed to be there when the forgetting turned to peace. That night, it rained again. Not the soft drizzle from before, but a steady rhythm, persistent and musical. The sound drummed against the skylights like thousands of tiny fingertips, echoing through the high ceiling and settling into Simone's bones. She opened the door right on time. 1 a.m. sharp. The air smelled of wet stone, ink, and something citrusy, perhaps leftover from the old woman with the velvet wrap. Simone lit the lamp slowly, pausing between each one as if waking up a cathedral. The shelves seemed taller tonight, the shadows deeper, but she didn't mind. She was used to the way the library breathed with the weather. At 1:11, the door opened again. This time, it was a boy, barely 16, maybe less. He had that slouched posture of someone used to not being seen. His hoodie was oversized, his sneakers dripping. He didn't look up as he shuffled to the guest book. He signed in, Milo H. Simone gave a polite nod, but said nothing. He walked straight to the far right corner of the library. Not many went there. That section was quieter, darker, mostly filled with unreadable texts. Books the library had taken in, but hadn't yet finished rewriting. They hummed faintly, like something unfinished. Milo sat cross-legged on the floor and pulled out a stack of crumpled paper from his backpack. He smoothed them against his thigh, one by one. Then he began to read, not aloud, but mouthing the words like spells. Simone, watching from across the room, saw his lips twitch with effort. His hand trembled as he held each page, eyes darting fast, like he was trying to finish before someone took them away. Halfway through the pile, he stopped. His face tensed. He folded one sheet into quarters and shoved it into his hoodie pocket. The rest, he left in a neat pile against the wall. Then he stood and walked out. Didn't look back. Didn't speak. When Simone reached the papers, she hesitated. The ink was smudged from water, maybe rain, maybe tears. The handwriting was small, written in pencil and pen, as if the author had used whatever was available. Most of the pages were letters, addressed to no one in particular. Today I skipped lunch again. No one noticed. They laughed in math class. I smiled like it didn't hurt. I wish someone would ask how I'm doing and actually mean it. Simone swallowed. She gathered the papers carefully and carried them to the shelves near the window. Not quite poetry, not quite journals. She found a slim gap between two half-written anthologies and tucked the letters in. The rain tapped louder for a moment, then softened. By morning, Simone imagined those notes would become something gentler. A short story, perhaps, about a boy who builds paper boats from the words he can't say and sets them floating across puddles that lead to the sea. A book of hope disguised as sadness. At 3:57, the library seemed to hold its breath. Simone closed her eyes and listened to the final sounds of the night. Page turning, like the flutter of wings. Pencil scratching, faint as wind and leaves. Rain on skylights, steady and soothing. And beneath it all, the hum of unread stories becoming something new. The rain had stopped by the next night, but the air was thick with mist. It clung to the sidewalks, curling around Simone's boots as she walked, making the streetlights shimmer like ghosts. She arrived at the library with damp hair and warm breath fogging before her. As usual, the door opened with a sigh. The lamps flickered to life one by one, and the shelves, tall, wordless, breathing, waited in silence. Tonight, Simone felt something different. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like the sense that the library was watching her back. Like someone had walked through just before she arrived and left a trace. She checked the guest book. No entries before her shift. No notes. Still, her fingers hovered over the page longer than usual. At 1:18, the bell above the door jingled once. The man who stepped in was wiry, with round glasses and gloves that had no fingertips. He wore a threadbare sweater over a button-down shirt and carried no bag, no papers, only a folded stool under one arm. Simone raised her eyebrows as he signed the guest book, Mr. Callum. That was all he wrote. "Welcome," she said softly. He gave a polite nod and went straight to the back wall. where the non-fiction shelves stood tallest. There, he unfolded the stool and sat. Not to read, not to write, but to shelve, book by book. From a pocket in his coat, he pulled slips of thin paper, almost like tissue. Simone watched in silence as he examined each shelf, gently removed a book, slid in a slip, and returned it. Some slips he left between pages. Some he tucked into the spine. One, she noticed, he placed on top of a volume and pressed his palm against it, as if to bless it. Simone approached slowly. Are you? She paused. Do you work here? Mr. Callum smiled, faint and tired. Not officially, he said, but I shelve what the library tells me to. Simone blinked. It tells you. He tapped his temple. Some people read the books. I read the silence. He stood and moved down the aisle, brushing his fingers along the spines. He hummed, a soft, tuneless sound, and it followed him like a shadow. She didn't stop him. Something about the way he moved, the reverence, the ease, told her he belonged here more than most. At 2:40, he stopped beside a slim red book Simone hadn't noticed before. He opened it slowly, then smiled. This one's ready, he said aloud. For what? To be forgotten, he whispered. She frowned. Forgotten. He closed the book, slipped in a paper, and shelved it gently. Some stories are healed by being remembered, he said. Others, by being let go. Then he returned to his stool, folded it under his arm, and headed for the door. Before leaving, he looked back. Don't worry, Miss Simone. The library likes you. She froze. How do you know my name? But Mr. Callum only winked and stepped into the mist. She ran to the guest book, but the name was gone. Only a faint indentation remained in the paper where the ink had been, as if it had never been written. At 3:58, Simone sat beside the red book. Its spine was smooth, warm. When she opened it, there was only one sentence on the first page. This was never yours to carry. She closed it, eyes stinging. Some stories, she realized, didn't need to be told, only released. The fog thickened overnight, curling like soft gray thread through alleyways and branches. By the time Simone arrived, the entire street was cloaked in it. The library stood like a secret, barely visible, waiting quietly, as if holding its breath. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and shut out the mist. The quiet welcomed her like an old friend. But something was off. The lamps flickered once, then twice, before settling. The air inside felt warmer than usual, as though someone had lit a fire and forgotten to tend it. Simone paused. She turned slowly toward the central reading room. Someone was already there. Curled up in the velvet armchair by the poetry shelves was a girl, no older than 10. Her knees were tucked to her chest, her shoes muddy, one sock bunched at the ankle. In her lap, she clutched a tiny notebook with a pink cover shaped like a heart. Her eyes were closed. She was sound asleep. Simone stepped closer, careful not to wake her. She glanced at the guest book. No name, no entry. How had she gotten in? The girl stirred. Her fingers tightened on the notebook. Her brow furrowed, lips moving in her sleep. Then, with a shiver, she opened her eyes. They were wide and dark, filled with both fear and the remnants of dreams. Simone knelt beside the chair. You're safe, she said gently. Do you know where you are? The girl nodded slowly, eyes still searching the room. The bookplace, she whispered. I was cold, so I came in. Simone smiled. What's your name? The girl hesitated, then mumbled. Lena. Hi, Lena. Do you want to stay a little while? She nodded again and held out the notebook. Simone took it carefully. Inside were simple, careful notes in a child's handwriting. Sometimes I don't talk at school. They say I'm too quiet. Mom cries a lot, but says not to tell anyone. When I write things down, I feel less heavy. On the last page, maybe books can listen, even if people don't. Simone blinked fast. Would you like to leave this here? She asked. Lena nodded. Simone placed the notebook between two storybooks about birds and storms, then returned to the girl's side. You can rest until morning, she said. So Lena did. She pulled her arms around herself and drifted back to sleep under the soft light of the lamps. Simone sat nearby, guarding the silence, sipping her tea. At 3:59, Lena stirred again. She looked around, rubbed her eyes, and gave Simone a tiny smile. I think I dreamed about clouds, she whispered. Good ones. Yeah, Lena said. They were hugging each other. Simone walked her to the door. Before Lena stepped out into the fog, she turned back. Will my notebook turn into a story? Yes, Simone said. A very gentle one. Then the girl was gone, vanishing into the mist like a character slipping between pages. Simone turned off the lamps, one by one, and walked to the shelf where Lena's notebook rested. Already, the cover had changed. No longer pink, now pale blue, with soft white swirls like cirrus clouds. She opened it to the first haiku, silent as feathers. A little girl holds her storms. Books breathed back her calm. Simone closed it and smiled. The library had listened, as it always did. The next evening, the fog had lifted, but a heavy stillness hung in the air. The kind that made footsteps feel louder and time feel slower. Simone noticed it right away as she approached the library's door, the brass key colder than usual in her hand. When she entered, something else was off. Not wrong, just louder. Voices, not speaking, exactly, but whispering. A low murmur, like someone reading to themselves from a distant corner. Simone stopped in the doorway, hands still on the knob. The lamps hadn't even been turned on, yet the sound drifted across the room, winding between the stacks. She flipped the switches one by one. Warm light spread across the stone floor, casting golden halos. The voices faded with every light, until they were gone. By the time she reached the main desk, the silence had returned. She signed the logbook quietly, still the only name there. But just after 1:10, the door creaked again. The man who stepped in was middle-aged, with a tight-lipped expression and a black overcoat, buttoned all the way to his neck. His hair was neatly parted, his shoes polished, but his eyes were loud. They darted across the room as though searching for something lost long ago. He moved quickly to the philosophy section, almost as if pulled. Simone watched as he slid out a thick leather-bound book and flipped through the pages without hesitation. He stopped halfway, ran a hand through his hair, then pulled a small recorder from his coat pocket. He pressed it to his lips. I still hear her voice. Not in dreams. In the silence. It's in the echo of the stairs, the quiet after the kettle boils. The back of my mind, where she lived. Click. He stopped the recording. Then he pressed play. The words played back, quieter, shakier. Simone stood frozen. Not many brought voices here. He placed the recorder inside the book, nestled between two pages. Then, without looking at her, he walked straight to the door. Just before leaving, he paused. She loved poetry, he said, voice thick. But she never got to finish her last line. Then he was gone. Simone approached the book carefully. Inside, the recorder still glowed red, still on. She pressed play. His voice crackled again, but something had changed. Over his own words, another voice, faint, female, warm, had layered itself into the silence. Not fully formed, like a voice heard through water. It didn't speak in full sentences, just fragments. But they shimmered. Starlight on the windowsill. Your hand on the kettle. Don't forget the jasmine. Simone's chest tightened. She slid the recorder deeper into the book and closed it gently. She moved it to the shelf with the transformed haiku journal and the sleeping girl's cloudy poems. Placed it beside a book with gilded edges that pulsed faintly under her touch. The voices, she realized, were never lost. They just waited for a place quiet enough to be heard again. And the library, this place, was that silence. At 3:55, the recorder clicked off by itself. Simone didn't touch it again. She just stood for a long moment, listening. And the library whispered back. Simone unlocked the door at 1 a.m. sharp. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke from a distant chimney. Inside, the library was quiet except for the steady tick of the old grandfather clock near the entrance. She switched on the lamps, their soft golden light filling the room like warm honey. As she arranged a stack of returned books, she noticed something odd resting on the front desk. A small, cream-colored envelope, sealed with a faded wax stamp. No visitor was in sight. Simone picked up the envelope carefully, noting the fine handwriting on the front, to be opened only when I am gone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned it over. There was no name, no date, only the faintest scent of lavender. Curious, she slipped the letter from the envelope and unfolded it. The paper was delicate, almost translucent, filled with a letter written in flowing script. My dearest, if you are reading this, it means I have finally found the courage to leave the burdens behind. For years, I carried the weight of silent grief, the words unspoken between us like stones in a river. But here, in this quiet place, I hope my heart can finally rest. May these words find you in peace. Simone felt a lump rise in her throat. She folded the letter gently and placed it beside a thick volume of unsent letters on a nearby shelf. She wondered who had left it and why no one had come to claim it. The hours passed quietly. A few visitors drifted in and out, leaving behind fragments of stories and worn notebooks. But Simone kept returning to that sealed envelope in her mind. At 3:42, the letter transformed. When Simone checked again, the words had rewritten themselves into a short poem, simple yet profound. Silent stones drift by. River carries what's too heavy. Peace and letting go. Simone smiled softly. The midnight library had done it again, turning sorrow into something lighter, something free. As the clock struck 4 a.m., Simone locked the door behind her, carrying with her the quiet comfort that even the heaviest hearts could find release between these walls. The clock struck 1 as Simone turned the key in the lock, the sound echoing down the empty street. Inside, the library held its usual quiet, the faint scent of old pages mingling with the cool night air. Simone's footsteps were the only sound as she moved to light the lamps. A chill brushed her skin as the door opened, but when she looked up, no one was there. She frowned and stepped closer. A folded piece of paper lay on the threshold. No footprints, no sign of the visitor. Simone picked it up carefully. The paper was thin and worn, edges frayed like an old leaf. On it was written a single line in small, shaky letters. For the lost, may you find yourself here. Simone's fingers brushed the words, feeling a quiet pulse beneath the ink. At 1:20, a figure finally appeared in the doorway. A young man wrapped in a threadbare coat, his face shadowed beneath a hood. He moved with a hesitant step, as if unsure this was where he belonged. He signed the guest book, anonymous. Simone watched as he wandered among the shelves, eyes searching the empty spines for something he couldn't name. He paused near the center, pulled from his pocket a tiny folded note, and placed it carefully inside a large book. Simone approached gently. "What is it you're looking for?" she asked. The man looked up, his eyes clouded but clear in the soft light. "Something I lost long ago," he whispered. "A memory, a hope, maybe a part of myself." Simone nodded. "Sometimes," she said, "the library helps us find the things we didn't even know we were missing." The man smiled faintly. He stayed until the final bell, reading words that transformed with each turn of the page. When he left, Simone found a new book resting where the note had been, a collection of poems about lost places and second chances. She ran her hand over the cover, whispering softly, "Welcome home." The air was thick with quiet when Simone arrived that night. The rain had stopped hours earlier, but the dampness lingered, clinging to the windows and seeping into the stone walls. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent wrapping around her like a soft shawl. Inside, the lamps glowed gently, casting warm circles of light. The silence was complete, except for the faint rustle of pages shifting in the gentle night breeze that slipped through a cracked window. Simone settled at her desk with her tea and began to make notes in her own journal, a ritual she kept sacred, though no one knew. At 1:12 a.m., footsteps echoed softly. A man entered, carrying an old violin case. He was in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a slow smile that softened the sharp angles of his face. He signed the guest book, Liam Calder. Without a word, he made his way to the music section, where dusty volumes of sheet music and forgotten songs rested. He opened the violin case, revealing an instrument worn but cared for. He sat by the window, pulled out the violin, and began to play. The notes were soft at first, tentative whispers, then grew into a song that filled the room with warmth and longing. The sound swirled through the stacks, wrapping around the books, stirring the still air. Simone closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When the song ended, Liam opened a small notebook and began to write, his pencil moving quickly, capturing melodies and memories. At 3:37, he stood, placed the notebook gently on the music shelf, and packed away his violin. Before leaving, he turned to Simone. "This place hears the songs we can't sing aloud," he said softly. Simone smiled. "Welcome back anytime." As the door closed, the notebook on the shelf began to glow faintly, the pages fluttering as if alive. By morning, the music would be transformed, notes turned into poems, memories into stories, sorrow into song. The Midnight Library listened and answered with the language of the heart. The night air was still, almost thick with anticipation, when Simone arrived. The street was deserted, the city asleep beneath a blanket of stars. The library's door creaked open like a whispered invitation, and Simone stepped inside, carrying the familiar weight of her keys. Inside, the lamps glowed softly, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The shelves stood silent, waiting. At 1:05 a.m., a man appeared in the doorway. He was small and wiry, wearing a leather apron dusted with fine metal filings. His eyes were bright behind thick glasses, and his fingers were stained with oil and grease. He signed a guest book, Elias Thorne, clockmaker. Without hesitation, Elias moved to the back shelves, pulling a small, intricately carved wooden box from his coat pocket. He placed it carefully on a table and opened it. Inside lay a delicate collection of gears, springs, and tiny cogs, some gleaming, others tarnished with age. He began to work quietly, assembling the pieces with precise, deliberate movements. The faint ticking of a small clock echoed softly, blending with the library's own rhythm. Simone watched, fascinated. "Why bring your work here?" she asked softly. Elias looked up, eyes gleaming. "The library has time," he said. "It holds moments, lost, forgotten, or waiting. I repair clocks, but here, I hope to fix moments." He worked for hours, the soft clicks of metal punctuating the silence. At 3:50, he closed the box and set it gently on a shelf marked only by a faded ribbon. "It's not just clocks that need fixing," he murmured. Simone nodded, understanding more than words could say. When Elias left, the library seemed to breathe deeper, as if relieved. Simone ran her fingers over the shelf where the box rested. By morning, the broken moments would become whole again, and the library would keep ticking. Simone arrived just as the clock struck 1. The city outside was silent, cloaked in the heavy hush of early morning. Inside the library, the familiar scent of old pages and polished wood greeted her like an old friend. As she switched on the lamps, a faint flicker caught her eye, a soft glow emanating from a corner near the history section. Curious, she approached. On a small table lay an old, sepia-toned photograph. The edges were curled and faded, but the image was clear. A family standing beneath a large oak tree, smiles bright, but eyes full of stories unspoken. No visitor was nearby. Simone picked up the photograph carefully. On the back was a single line written in elegant cursive. "Remember us, even when the world forgets." She tucked the photo gently between 2 heavy volumes of forgotten memoirs. At 1:23, the door opened, and a young woman stepped inside, clutching a small box. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her breath coming in quiet gasps. She signed the guest book, Clara M. Without speaking, she moved to the photograph and sat beside it. Slowly, she opened her box, revealing a collection of letters, worn and fragile. She read aloud softly, voice trembling, a story of love and loss woven through the words. Simone watched as the young woman's pain slowly softened, the room filled with a gentle warmth. When Clara left at 3:55, the photograph had changed. Now it showed the same family, but beneath them, delicate vines bloomed, symbols of hope growing from memory. Simone smiled. In the Midnight Library, nothing was truly forgotten. Simone entered the library at 1 a.m. sharp, the cool night air clinging to her coat. Inside, the familiar hush greeted her like a lullaby. Lamps flickered on, casting golden pools of light across the towering shelves. As she walked to her desk, a faint rustling echoed from the poetry section, a soft murmur, like whispered secrets fluttering between pages. Curious, Simone followed the sound. She found a woman sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open books. Her hair fell in loose waves, eyes closed, lips moving silently. The woman opened her eyes as Simone approached. "Amira," she said softly. "I come to listen." Simone nodded, understanding more than words. Mira picked up a book and traced the lines of poetry with trembling fingers. The pages seemed to shimmer, glowing faintly under her touch. "She says your worries become stories here," Mira whispered. "The pages remember for us." Together, they read, voices weaving through the quiet night, stories born from pain and hope. At 3:50, Mira stood, a soft smile on her lips. "Thank you," she said, "for listening." Simone watched her leave, the whispering pages settling back into stillness. In the midnight library, every voice mattered, even those spoken between the lines. The clock chimed 1 as Simone arrived, the cold night pressing softly against the windows. Inside, the library breathed quietly, shelves lined with silent stories waiting to be heard. A man stood near the entrance, shoulders heavy beneath a worn coat. His eyes were tired but alert. He held a thick manuscript, its pages dog-eared and stained. He signed in, Jonas W. Without a word, he moved to a table and began to write, his pen scratching urgently across the paper. Simone watched as he poured out his thoughts, fears, regrets, memories too heavy to carry alone. Hours passed. The rain began again, tapping against the skylights. At 3:45, Jonas finally rested his pen. He looked up, relief washing over his face. He slid the manuscript onto the nearest shelf and whispered, "Thank you." Simone ran her fingers along the spine. She knew the library would ease the weight of his words, turning them into something lighter, something hopeful. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Simone closed the door behind her, carrying the quiet strength of stories healed by the night. The night was crisp and clear when Simone arrived, the stars shining like scattered diamonds above the quiet city. The library's door opened smoothly as she stepped inside, the familiar scent of aged paper wrapping around her like a warm shawl. Tonight, something lay on the front desk, a small, ornate key, its brass surface worn and glowing faintly in the lamplight. No note, no sign of who might have left it. Simone picked it up carefully, feeling the cool weight in her palm. She turned it over, examining the intricate engraving, a tiny tree entwined with a spiral. At 1:15, the door opened, and a young man entered, his eyes bright with curiosity. He wore a leather jacket and carried a worn backpack. He signed the guest book, Evan K. Simone showed him the key. "Have you lost this?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, but maybe it's for something I've been trying to unlock." Together, they explored the library's farthest shelves, searching for a lock that fit the key. At last, behind a row of old journals, they found a small wooden box with a matching keyhole. Evan slid the key in and turned it gently. Inside lay a collection of letters, photographs, and a faded map, clues to a story forgotten by time. Simone smiled. Some keys, she thought, didn't open doors. They opened memories. As dawn neared, the library hummed softly, its stories waiting patiently to be found. The wind howled softly outside, rattling the windows as Simone stepped into the library. Inside, the air was still, almost reverent, like the calm before a storm. The lamps cast warm circles of light, battling shadows that curled in the corners. She noticed a new book on the poetry shelf, a slim volume bound in dark blue leather with no title. Curious, she opened it. Inside, the pages were blank except for a single sentence written in delicate silver ink. Sometimes the loudest storms are the ones we carry inside. At 1:10, a woman entered, wrapped in a heavy coat, her eyes tired but fierce. She signed the guest book, Isabel R. Without a word, Isabel sat by the window and opened the blue book. She began to write, first softly, then with growing intensity, words that trembled with grief and hope. Simone watched as the words transformed, glowing faintly on the page before shifting into a poem about rain, loss, and quiet resilience. At 3:50, Isabel closed the book and stood. She smiled faintly at Simone. "Thank you for this safe place," she whispered before leaving into the night. Simone closed the book and returned it to the shelf. In the midnight library, even the quietest storms found a place to rest. The night was deep and still when Simone arrived. The library stood quiet, its windows reflecting the silver light of the moon. She stepped inside, the familiar scent of paper and wood wrapping around her like a comforting cloak. Tonight, something different caught her eye, a small, ornate mirror leaning against the biography shelf. The frame was delicate, carved with twisting vines and tiny flowers. She picked it up and looked into it. At first, she saw only her own reflection. Then, slowly, the glass shimmered, revealing scenes from long ago, faces smiling and fading, places that seemed both strange and familiar. At 1:30, a man entered, his eyes catching the light like a flame. He signed the guest book, Daniel R. He noticed the mirror in her hands and approached. "That belonged to my grandmother," he said quietly. "She said it showed the memories we forget." Simone nodded. Together, they watched as the mirror flickered, images of laughter, tears, and moments lost in time. Daniel touched the frame gently. "I came to find what I was missing," he whispered. The mirror pulsed softly, then glowed with a warm light. By dawn, Daniel's eyes were clearer, his shoulders lighter. The library had given him back a part of himself. Simone placed the mirror back on the shelf. Some reflections, she thought, were worth remembering. The library was quiet as Simone arrived, the early hours wrapped in soft shadows. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, greeted by the faint scent of ink and old pages. Near the fiction section lay an unmarked notebook, its leather cover worn and soft. Simone picked it up gently and opened to the first page. Words appeared as if written by an invisible hand. Every word spoken leaves an echo, some loud, some fading, but all part of the story. At 1:05, a young man entered, clutching a camera bag and looking both nervous and hopeful. He signed the guest book, Eli J. Without hesitation, Eli sat near the poetry shelves and began to write in the notebook. His words spilled out, thoughts on silence, memories of voices lost, and the search for meaning in the quiet. Simone watched as the pages shimmered, the ink shifting into poems that sang softly of connection and loss. At 3:48, Eli closed the notebook and smiled. "This place," he said softly, "makes the quiet loud enough to hear." Simone nodded. In the midnight library, even echoes found a voice. That night, the library felt warmer, the lamps casting soft, golden light like flickering candles. Outside, a gentle drizzle whispered against the windows, adding a rhythmic hush to the stillness inside. Simone arrived, her coat damp but her spirit steady. She unlocked the door and switched on the lamps. At 1:17, a woman entered carrying a small lantern. Her hair was streaked with silver, and her eyes held quiet stories. She signed the guest book, Mara L. Without hesitation, Mara walked to the philosophy section, pulling a thick, leather-bound book from the shelf. She opened it carefully and began to read by the soft glow of her lantern. Simone watched as Mara's eyes softened, her fingers tracing the words as though comforting a dear friend. For hours, the woman read, occasionally jotting notes in a small journal. At 3:52, Mara closed her book and smiled. "This place," she said softly, "is a light in the dark." Simone nodded, understanding. In the midnight library, even the smallest light could guide the way home. The city was silent, wrapped in the soft blanket of midnight as Simone arrived at the library. The air smelled faintly of rain and blooming jasmine, a scent that seemed to belong only to this quiet hour. Inside, the lamps cast gentle light over the rows of books, the shadows dancing like whispers. At 1:05, a man entered carrying a worn notebook and a small flute. He signed the guest book, Julian M. Without a word, Julian moved to the music section and began to play a slow, haunting melody on his flute. The notes floated through the air, filling the space between shelves with sound that spoke of longing and hope. Simone closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When Julian finished, he opened his notebook and began to write, words flowing like the melody he had just played. At 3:50, he closed the notebook and placed it carefully on the shelf. "Thank you," he whispered to Simone before leaving. She smiled softly. In the midnight library, even the songs without words found their voice. Simone unlocked the door as the clock struck 1. Outside, the night was still, the stars faint behind a thin veil of clouds. Inside, the library hummed with quiet energy, the lamps glowing softly. Near the skylight, Simone noticed a book she hadn't seen before, a slender volume bound in deep green with no title. Curious, she opened it. Inside, the pages showed beautiful illustrations of faraway places, rolling hills, sparkling rivers, and strange cities under violet skies. At 1:20, a woman stepped in, her eyes wide with wonder. She signed the guest book, Ilara S. Ilara sat beneath the skylight and opened the green book. As she read, the colors from the pages seemed to shimmer and shift, painting the air with scenes from other worlds. Simone watched as Alara's face softened, her worries melting away like mist. At 3:57, Alara closed the book and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. The Midnight Library had given her a window to elsewhere, a place to dream when the real world was too heavy. Simone placed the book gently back on the shelf, knowing the journey would continue when night returned. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shining under the streetlights. Simone stepped inside the library, the faint smell of wet earth mixing with the scent of old books. She lit the lamps, their glow warming the quiet space. On the floor near the entrance, a small paper boat floated in a shallow puddle left by a leak in the skylight. Simone picked it up carefully. Inside, folded tiny letters were written in a child's handwriting. At 1:05, a boy entered, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He signed the guest book, Toby L. Toby sat near the window and unfolded more paper boats from his backpack. Each was covered in words, worries, hopes, dreams. He set the boats afloat in puddles around the library, watching as they drifted silently. Simone smiled softly. At 3:50, Toby stood and whispered, "Thank you for letting my worries sail away." She nodded. In the Midnight Library, even the smallest paper boats carried the heaviest hearts toward calm seas. The night was cool and clear when Simone arrived. The city was asleep, the streets bathed in silver moonlight. Inside, the library waited, filled with the soft rustle of pages and quiet shadows. Simone lit the lamps, their glow spreading warmth through the rows of books. Near the music section, a small music box sat unopened on a shelf. Its wooden surface was carved with delicate flowers, worn smooth by time. At 1:10, an elderly man entered, his hands trembling slightly as he carried a folded sheet of music. He signed the guest book, Arthur B. Arthur carefully opened the music box and wound it. A soft, haunting melody played, a song forgotten by time. He closed his eyes and whispered the words aloud, a lullaby for lost moments. Simone watched as the notes lifted and shimmered, filling the room with gentle light. At 3:55, Arthur closed the music box and smiled. "Thank you," he said softly. In the Midnight Library, even forgotten songs found their way back to the heart. The library was silent except for the faint ticking of the old clock as Simone entered. The night was deep, the air cool and still. She turned on the lamps, their soft glow chasing away the shadows. On a small table near the entrance, a single candle sat, unlit, but its wick pristine and untouched. Simone approached, curious. At 1:12, a woman stepped inside carrying a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. She signed the guest book, Clara V. Clara sat beside the candle, carefully untied the letters, and began to read aloud softly, stories of love, loss, hope, and forgiveness. The candle remained unlit, yet the room seemed warmer, filled with a gentle light from the words themselves. At 3:57, Clara closed the last letter and smiled. "Sometimes, the brightest light shines without flame," she whispered. Simone nodded. In the Midnight Library, even unburned candles could kindle the soul. The night air was heavy with silence as Simone entered the library. Outside, the city seemed paused, wrapped in a quiet that seeped into her bones. Inside, the familiar scent of paper and dust welcomed her. She switched on the lamps, their warm light filling the high ceiling with gentle radiance. On a shelf near the entrance lay a dusty, leather-bound book, its cover cracked and faded. No title marked its spine. Simone opened it carefully. The pages were filled with names, long lists written in fading ink. Many were crossed out, some circled, others written with a trembling hand. At 1:25, a man appeared, his coat heavy with rain. He signed the guest book, Harold K. He took the book from Simone and began to read. His voice was low as he whispered names, each one a memory, a story, a person forgotten by the world but held here in the library's heart. Hours passed. The rain softened to a drizzle. At 3:59, Harold closed the book gently. "Thank you," he said softly, "for remembering." Simone smiled. In the Midnight Library, no one was ever truly forgotten. The night was thick with mist as Simone arrived at the library. The street lamps glowed faintly through the haze, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, the air was warm and still. She switched on the lamps, their soft light chasing away shadows. On the front desk lay an unsealed envelope, its paper pale and untouched. Simone opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet, blank except for a faint watermark of a bird in flight. At 1:15, a woman entered, her eyes heavy but searching. She signed the guest book, Maya S. Maya sat by the window, tracing the watermark with trembling fingers. Without a word, she began to write on a fresh sheet, her pen moving slowly but steadily. The words appeared like whispers, letters to someone lost, hopes unspoken, apologies unsaid. At 3:55, Maya folded the paper and placed it beside the empty envelope. She looked at Simone and whispered, "Some letters are meant to be felt, not read." Simone nodded, understanding. In the midnight library, even silence could speak volumes. Simone stepped into the library as the clock chimed 1. Outside, the city lights blinked faintly through a light drizzle. Inside, the air held the quiet promise of stories waiting to unfold. As she lit the lamps, a flicker caught her eye, a shadow moving swiftly between the shelves, too quick to catch. She followed it softly, the floor creaking beneath her careful steps. Near the mystery section, a book lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering though no breeze stirred. Simone knelt and read the words. Sometimes, the stories we fear are the ones we need most. At 1:30, a man entered, his eyes wide and restless. He signed the guest book, Isaac M. Isaac moved to the open book and began to read aloud. The shadow flickered again, this time pausing near the pages, as if listening. Together, Simone and Isaac read, voices weaving through the silence. At 3:50, the shadow vanished, leaving only the soft turning of pages behind. Simone closed the book gently. In the midnight library, even shadows carried stories waiting to be told. The library was hushed as Simone arrived, the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight against the night. She moved through the familiar aisles, her footsteps soft on the worn wooden floor. On a table near the fiction section lay a single book, its cover blank and smooth, as if waiting for a story to be told. Curious, Simone opened it. The pages were empty, except for the very last one. There, in delicate handwriting, was written, "Every story finds its end, but some endings are only beginnings." At 1:10, a woman entered, carrying a small bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. She signed the guest book, Evelyn F. Evelyn approached the blank book and began to write, her pen moving slowly, filling the empty pages with memories and dreams. Simone watched as the words glowed softly, lifting from the paper like fireflies in the dark. At 3:58, Evelyn closed the book and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered. Simone closed the cover gently. In the midnight library, every ending held the promise of a new beginning.